Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch video, and today we're taking a look at the Tudor Black Bay 58. As with all my reviews, let's go back in time now and take a look at the Tudor Black Bay. We're actually going to skip back and look more specifically at their dive watch history, Tudor as a brand, their dive watch history, rather than the other models. And we're going to skip most of the history out, and on another video I'll discuss Tudor's history more in depth. But we're going to skip back now to 1926, which is when Hans Wilsdorf founded Tudor. And Hans was actually the founder of Rolex a couple of years before that, but Hans wanted to create a watch company that offered watches for a slightly lower price point than his Rolex watches. The Rolex watches were obviously expensive, but incredibly reliable. So he wanted to keep that same reliability that the Rolex models were, offering, but just a slightly lower price point. And he had great success. In fact, many militaries around the world bought his watches because they were extremely reliable, rugged, hard-wearing, but also quite cost-effective and much cheaper than some other models in the other collections of other brands. So the first watch that we really want to look at, one of actually Tudor's most important watches, was released in 1954. Now, it was a year after Rolex released their Submariner in 1953. The Submariner is, of course, one of the most important watches that Rolex has ever made. The Tudor watch that we're looking at is the reference 7922, and it was pretty much an exact copy or replica of the Rolex Submariner, the first Submariner. The reference 7922 was named the Oyster Prince Submariner. It was a slightly more cost-effective, a slightly cheaper version of the Submariner, the Rolex Submariner. The Tudor version was, using slightly lesser materials to be able to, make it a cheaper watch. We're going to skip a couple years on now to 1958, which is when Tudor released the reference 7924, which was a slightly updated version of the Oyster Prince Submariner. The 7924 featured much better water resistance now at 200 meters versus 100 meters for the old 22 reference. The 24 also, that improvement in the water resistance brought it up to speed with the Rolex water resistance and put it on a much closer level to the Rolex watches, the Submariners around that time. The 24 reference also featured a slight design change, some slightly different looking design. It featured gold hands and gold index markers on the dial, gold print on the dial. So essentially a new look for the Oyster Prince Submariner. Now we're going to skip almost 60 years on to 2012, and that's when Tudor released the Black Bay Heritage line. This was a nod to their old history, the vintage watches they released back in the 50s and 60s. And most of the designs were actually inspired by the watches they released in the 50s. So it was kind of a nod to their history, hence heritage. And they were extremely popular. The models did very, very well. They've sold fantastically since the Tudor Black Bays. It actually is brought Tudor back into the map, or back onto the map in terms of watchmaking. They weren't doing so well previous to that 2012 release. So it was an incredibly important release for them. And Tudor now is kind of known for just making like vintage inspired or retro looking watches. And they're really, really brilliant at doing that. The fantastic thing about those watches was everyone loved those older designs that the original Oyster Prince Submariners featured, that older look, without the crown guards, the larger crowns, but obviously wanted it on a modern watch that cost less than the vintage versions, and also featured modern features like a new movement, sapphire crystals, aluminium bezels, etc., etc. So we're going to skip another couple years on now to 2018. Last year at Bezel 2018, Tudor released a really important watch, and that was the Black Bay 58, which is what we're looking at here today. Now the 58 was kind of a response the Tudor clients were saying to Tudor about the design changes they wished they could have on the Black Bay Heritage at that time. The Black Bay Heritage is quite a large watch. It's a 42mm case size, but it's also extremely deep. So it wears much larger than that. It wears much more like a 44, 43mm watch. And that put a lot of people off because the original Tudors, the original Oyster Prince Submariners weren't that large. They were actually 37mm case sizes and were quite slim watches. So even though they featured the same look that the original vintage watches had, Tudor had upscaled it to fit in line with today's standard of much larger watch sizes than back then. So people are requesting a case size more similar to what actually Tudor had released back in the 50s. So the Black Bay 58 was actually inspired by the reference 7924, released in 1958. That was that second or third iteration really of the Submariner, the Tudor Oyster Prince Submariner, released back in the 50s, and it was the one that I mentioned that had the 200 meter water resistance, a slightly updated version with the gold hands, the gold index markers. And Tudor essentially copied that same watch, the exact same watch and exact same design, exact same look, and they basically just modernized it, put a new in-house movement with 70-hour power reserve, a slimmed down movement, because obviously the standard 42mm Black Bay featured a slightly larger movement. So this one featured a brand new movement, riveted bracelet, just a few different features that matched it up pretty much identically to that 7924 reference from 1958. And this watch has been such a success for Tudor already. It has a waiting list immediately once it was released. It's selling for over its list price. It's a fantastic price point at £2,470 for the strap variant, and then £2,740 for the bracelet variant. So it's a really, really affordable watch, much more so than any of the Submariners from Rolex. So it's incredibly popular in that respect, and also people love the fact that it's smaller and much more similar to the original Black Bay, or the original Oyster Prince Submariner back from the 1950s. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the features of this watch. So we're going to start with the clasp. This one that we're looking at here today is the strap variant of this watch, featuring the leather strap, not the NATO strap. The features between this and the bracelet are obviously similar, just, bar the bracelet. I'll mention some features of the bracelet too. So the strap on this watch features a lovely deployment clasp with a mixture of polished and brushed finishing on the clasp. It's a really simple clasp, very, very nicely made with a fold over section. Very solid. I mean, it's nothing, it's not quite as solid as maybe a Rolex clasp and Oyster clasp on the Rolex watches, but different price point and different watches. Nonetheless, it's a really nice clasp and it's very, very comfortable. The strap on this watch is a really nice leather. It's kind of got a slight suede effect to it, like a microfiber almost, micro hairs within the leather. So you can actually feel a different grain within the leather on this strap. Really nice, soft, supple strap. It suits the watch really nice. The one that we've actually got on the watch right now that you're looking at is a different strap. It's a darker strap, which I personally think suits this watch a little bit better. But the great thing about these Tudors is that you can swap out the straps like all the Rolexes as well and change them up and give them a completely different look. Difference between the bracelet obviously and the strap is the bracelet features metal links, and it's all a brush finish with a polished finish on the sides of the bracelet, and this the Black Bay 58 features a riveted bracelet as well to give it that vintage look and that kind of old style Submariner look. A really, really cool bracelet. The clasp on that watch is very simple. Simple, nice bracelet. Personally, I like the strap variant of this watch, but I'll come on to that later on. Moving now up onto the case, we've got a beautiful 39mm, perfect case size in my opinion for this Tudor Black Bay. I wish Rolex offered a 38 or 39mm version of the Submariner with no crown guards like Tudor's doing here. I just think it's one of the coolest looking cases in the market. I absolutely love this case. I love the oversized crown on this watch. I love the lack of crown guards on this case. I think it gives the watch a slightly more dressy feel than a standard Submariner with the crown guards and the chunkier super case style. I love this kind of more classic feeling of a dive watch. It just feels super elegant and much more beautiful in my opinion than the Submariner. It features obviously a much lower profile than the other Black Bay models, the 42mm Black Bay models, and I think this looks so much better being thinner. The actual bezel on this watch is slightly different to what Rolex puts on their on their Submariners, and this is just a little example of the difference between Tudors and Submariners, Tudors and Rolexes, sorry. The bezel on this watch is an aluminium bezel with these numbers actually printed on, whereas the Submariner features a ceramic bezel, so it doesn't scratch or tarnish over time, and it features platinum inlays for the numbers, the different markers on the bezel. So a real difference in price point there, because a completely different level of quality and finish and material really. The Rolex is far more hard wearing than that bezel on the Tudor. The Tudor will still be hard wearing, but you will notice it might tarnish quicker than something like a ceramic bezel. I do really like the bezel on this though. I love the way that those gold numbers match into the dial and the hands and the index markers and the different script, the print, I mean, on the actual dial itself. Moving now onto the crystal of this watch, we've got a sapphire crystal. It's nice and deep, slightly more deeper than the Submariner, which I really like, gives it kind of that more vintage look, which I think looks really, really cool. Moving now up onto the dial, we've got our beautiful black dial with the kind of gold script on the gold printed script on the dial, matching up to our gold index markers and our gold hands, and that ties in with the bezel as well, and it all ties in and matches the original 1958 reference 7924. So it's all inspired by that same watch from 1958. Those gold markings were on that original 1958 model as well. So I really like that Tudor's included that too. I think it adds a real nice depth and warmth to this watch. It helps it make it feel a bit more dressy. I think if it featured steel hands or white gold hands, I think it would feel much more of a utility watch and not quite as dressy and beautiful as this watch actually looks. Okay, so that concludes most of the features. We could look at the movement as well. 70-hour power reserve in-house, great reliable movement. But yeah, overall, would I own this watch? 100%. I think this is an absolutely stunning watch. I think it's probably one of the best cases, easily the best dive watch case available to the whole market. I think the Submariner case is a beautiful case, but this is much more beautiful in my opinion. I just think it suits my wrist personally much better. I think it suits a much wider range of wrists than maybe the Submariner does. I absolutely love the lack of crown guards on this Black Bay 58. I love the giant crown as well. I just love that vintage Submariner look that this watch features. And I think it's fantastic that we can have that look and that beautiful design that Rolex invented all those years ago on a modern watch with all the modern features that we've come to love and know, like extended power reserves and sapphire crystals. Would I own this watch on the bracelet or the strap? I would definitely own it on the strap, but I think most people probably buy this on the bracelet because it's much more reminiscent of the original Submariner, both from Tudor and Rolex. I love the fact that this watch just looks super cool on the strap, makes it look a bit more dressy. You can also dress it down by putting it on a purlin strap or maybe a NATO strap. I just think it makes the watch a bit more versatile being on the strap. I personally don't love the rivets on the bracelet. I think they make it look a bit chunky and a bit cumbersome, so that's also another reason why I prefer the straps. I also think the deployment clasp is much nicer than the clasp on the bracelets, the deployment clasp that is for the straps. So yeah, for me, I would choose the strap version. I would definitely own this watch. I wear it all the time on NATO straps and purlin straps. I just think it's one of the coolest pieces out there, and for the price of £2,470, it is incredible. If you're struggling to get this from Tudor, we can get them in, but the price will be just a little bit above the retail price. So yeah, thanks guys for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think about this Tudor Black Bay 58. Would you own this one or the standard Black Bay Heritage? And as always, if you're interested in this watch or any other watch in the Tudor collection or any other Swiss manufacturer, then don't hesitate to contact us. Our details are in the description, and also at the end of the video, it'll be a pleasure to call this watch into stock for you.